Hello, my fellow Americans. If you are familiar with me, you'll know that I spent the last 6 months working for the Arizona Democratic Party as a field organizer, recruiting, training, and managing volunteers on behalf of Democrats up and down the ballot in Arizona, but primarily for Kamala Harris's presidential campaign, which was we were the only presence of the Kamala Harris campaign in Arizona. Before I continue any further, I'd like to make it extra clear that this video and my channel will focus on my own thoughts and not feature any exclusive insights into whatever secrets the campaign holds, because, I was on the lowest rung imaginable. My best insight into what the decision makers were up to was whatever they might say on Pod Save America. They wouldn't actually say that to us. I was a cog in the machine, and I had as little control over the general state of the campaign as you did. I also acknowledge that I need to watch my language in the interest of being employed ever again. As a campaign worker, I'm in a precarious situation where I want to exercise my own voice and share my own thoughts on politics and give constructive critiques of the Democratic Party, all whilst being incredibly dependent on the Democratic Party and its allies for employment. It's not easy getting hired as a trans person in Arizona, turns out, and much less so when I post my radical political opinions on the internet. However, I still feel my thoughts are important, and I refuse to live silently. If any future employers see this, please know I just want the best for this country. First, let's establish how this happened. Donald Trump only won 3 million more votes than in 2020, whereas Harris lost 7 million votes versus 2020. So that's 4 million votes unaccounted for. I don't know where they went. But, do you think that those 3 million people just flipped? I don't think so. No. I think, overall, less people voted in 2020 than less people voted in 2024 than in 2020. I just double checked the numbers on that, and it seems to be holding up quite accurately. Yeah. So, what does this mean? Well, certainly does not mean that Trump is what the majority of Americans want. Trump is only what his voters want, and never forget that distinction. What I think this means, Democratic voters could not be bothered to vote. 7 million there was 81 million Democratic votes in 2020, 74 million in 2024. Did 7 million people flip towards Donald Trump after he attempted a coup to overthrow the government? I just don't think so. No. I think Democrat voters were pissed and they didn't vote. Pundits are quick to point to her radical policies, such as protecting transgender individuals like myself, but they miss the real picture. Democrats suffered from severely depressed turnout because of their obsession with persuasion. Consider the stark difference in appeals towards the Democratic base versus towards the Republican base. Towards the Democratic base, the only appeal I can really recall is picking Tim Walz as VP due to his record of implementing liberal policies in his home state. That was exciting, and that gave us hope that a Harris-Walz administration would get shit done, something that Democrats haven't done in a long while. Democrats have had a laundry list of legislation that they've been waiting to pass for decades. Reproductive rights, expanding Social Security and Medicare, improving our education systems, lowering the cost of housing. Right? There's lots of things that we want done. So we see a guy that's got things done, and we're excited about him. Now, as for appeals towards the Republican base, the Harris campaign offered to put Republicans in her cabinet and lock down the southern border. But why would this convince any Republicans to vote for her? Sure, you can argue, well, it proves she's not a radical liberal and she's willing to compromise. That might convince some rhinos, but not most Republicans. And remember, these appeals don't exist in a vacuum. Both bases observed appeals in both directions. Republicans were unmoved by appeals to Democrats. Sure, but Democrats were depressed by appeals to Republicans. Recently, Harris pledged to follow the law regarding trans issues. Just as an example, listen to me. She pledged to follow the law regarding trans issues. Rather than, upfront saying, I will defend trans people's right to identify how they choose, which you'd think wouldn't be a lot to ask of a liberal who has said such things before. I'm going to go over this from the perspective of three characters. The transphobe, the trans ally, and the trans individual. To the transphobe, who is likely to vote for Trump, this gives her one good policy, albeit a small one. Have you ever switched which party you're planning to vote for over one good policy? The transphobe likely holds other conservative positions, most of which won't be found on Harris's platform. Their vote does not necessarily change, but they might be slightly less oppositional to Harris. To the trans ally, who was likely to vote for Harris, this is depressing. Now she's downgraded herself from someone with a platform you totally agree with to one with one bad policy, albeit a small one. The trans ally likely holds other liberal positions, most of which are found on Harris's platform, so their vote does not change, but they are a little bit less excited to support Harris. Maybe they won't donate as much. It is the decline in excitement which can depress turnout. Remember, elections are won by margins of 0.1 to 3% in this country. Even a slight depress in turnout can swing a whole state's electoral votes. And that's exactly what we saw across the country on November 5th. But to continue on this point, to the trans individual who was likely to vote Democrat, this is horrific. Harris now has one bad policy, and it's a major one. To most, the policy would have no impact on their day-to-day life, but to the trans individual, this policy can be life-changing. Neither candidate will protect their right to exist freely, and so why vote at all? Of course, the rational transgender voter will conclude that other issues at hand are still important, and they'll still vote for Harris anyway. But some won't. Some will stay home. Now consider how this plays out on all of Harris's other appeals towards Republicans. How many Republicans flip to Harris because of her inaction on Gaza and her dedication to Israel? Not so many. How many Democratic voters are disappointed by that? How many Republicans flip to Harris because Democrats have adopted hawkish new border policy? How many Democrats who oppose Trump's border policy are disappointed? How many Democrats are disappointed to hear that the Harris campaign in 2024 is essentially promising the Trump 2020 platform, which they had already voted against? I know that's hyperbolic, okay? But they really were just trying to be just like an older, tamer version of Trump in some ways, especially on border policy. You can't even deny. She said that she wanted to finish building the wall. What the fuck? One would be tempted to point to the record-breaking rally attendance, the Harris campaign. Oh, I skipped a paragraph. That's what happens when you don't practice reading your script. During my time as a field organizer for the Harris campaign, I would often complain that we were focused too much on persuasion and not enough on turnout. Because, turnout is more efficient than persuasion in the same way that casting a net over a school of fish is superior to spearfishing. Harris could earn thousands more votes from exciting people who had never voted before rather than persuading people who normally do. One might be tempted to point to the record-breaking rally attendance the Harris campaign created to challenge my assertion that voters were not excited to vote for Kamala Harris. It's important to note, then, that most of these rallies were between 5,000 and 20,000 in attendance, or, less than 20,000. While those are still large figures, in an election where hundreds of millions of votes are cast, high rally attendance cannot be used to gauge the excitement of voters, especially considering that rally goers are naturally going to self-select themselves to be the most excited individuals. It's really sampling bias. Sampling bias. It's convenience sampling if you took a high school stats class ever. Now, oh, excuse me. Whew, so sorry. Democrats are obsessed with the median voter theory. It's the idea that voters, being rational, will vote for the candidate which most closely matches their values, and that voters' political beliefs can be expressed in a single dimension. Therefore, if a candidate's platform is close to the median of the voting population's distribution, that candidate can maximize the number of votes who share their values and thus receive a majority of votes. Think if there's a line, you want as many people as each person is like a dot on that line, and they're drawing an arrow to which candidate is closest. Right? And so you want your own candidate's dot to be as close to all the other dots as possible. And so if one is on the far end of the spectrum, you can be anywhere else on the spectrum, literally anywhere else, and everyone on the left will still see that you are closer to them than the other guy because he's on the far end. So everyone from the other end will come to you. That's the idea, right? This theory relies on the assumption that a candidate's platform cannot negatively impact turnout. Democrats believe, then, that those to their left are in the bag because there is not a viable candidate to the left of the Democrats. The Democratic candidate will always be the closest match to leftist voters and will, therefore, always receive their votes because the rational leftist understands that Democratic victory is preferable for them than a Republican one, over a Republican one. Therefore, to win elections, they must only pander further right to decrease their ideological difference between their platform and independent or Republican voters. In this strategy, they only become more conservative, causing the Democratic candidate to become the closest match to voters who would otherwise vote Republican. We saw this happen in 2016 as well. People perceived Hillary Clinton to be an establishment corporate Democrat that wouldn't help them significantly, and they hated Trump, so a lot of people stayed home. If this approach worked as intended, Hillary Clinton would have won in 2016, and Harris would have won in 2024. However, that's not what happened. When Harris took every opportunity to pander toward the right, just as Joe Biden did in 2020, we lost. Remember how unpopular it was back in 2020 when Joe Biden picked a district attorney to be his vice president during the height of the George Floyd protests in the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement? Remember when someone said, "Didn't you pass the crime bill?" And he said, "If you don't vote for me, you ain't black." That's kind of fucked up. It's like, if you're black, you're gonna vote for me because I'm good for you no matter how racist you think I am. That's essentially what he said in 2020. And he fucking still won. That's a disgusting thing for a president to say during a campaign. That's a fucking terrible thing to say. It's a miracle he won with the campaign he ran. It seemed voters would put up with any candidate so long as it wasn't Trump. But Harris's loss demonstrates that this is not the case. And it has become apparent to me that voters have a maximum ideological distance from a candidate that they'll tolerate before choosing to abstain from voting at all. We could understand the probability of a given voter voting for a given candidate as a little equation I've made up, P equals V over D, where P represents the probability of voting for that candidate, V represents a quantification of the difficulty of voting, and D represents the ideological distance between the candidate and the voter. As V increases or D decreases, then P will increase. As it becomes easier to vote and the ideological distance decreases, then the probability of casting a vote for that candidate will increase. If I were to be more exact with this equation, to actually use to make hard predictions, there would also be some unknown constants in there against both variables to make the ratio more accurate, similar to how Avogadro's number is necessary to convert atomic mass units to metric system units. You need a constant in there to make the conversions work out. Increasing V will turn out your lazy supporters. Think how many would vote if they could do it in one button press from home rather than travel to a poll with their ID. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying more people would vote if it was easier, right? If you decreased V, add more restrictions if voting becomes harder, then your supporters might decide that they have something better to do. Decreasing D, the ideological distance from your voter to your candidate, will convert your opponents because you're appealing to their beliefs. However, decreasing D among conservatives will inevitably increase D among liberals and leftists. The value of D, remember, will vary from individual to individual. I imagine that someone more proficient in data than I am would be able to adjust this formula to predict what proportion of a population will turn out to vote for a particular candidate by substituting V and D with averages of those values for the given population. So that's my model right there. 2020 was expected to be a major blue wave because people thought everyone hates Trump. So it's blue wave all the way. And yet, Biden only eked out a win by, Electoral College, it looked the same as Trump's 2016 win. And I think he did have several million votes above in the popular vote. But if you looked at the margin in each of the individual swing states, it was less than 2% in, I think, all of them. It was 0.4% here in Arizona. Razor thin margins. He barely won. Indeed, we did see record-breaking turnout in that election, which is why it happened. But one would be remiss to say that it was because of a bona fide resentment towards Donald Trump in the American people that increased voter turnout so drastically. Instead, one should remember that nearly every state across America made it easier to vote for one election. The social distancing requirements that COVID, put onto us required many states to implement vote-by-mail systems, which I'm going to henceforth refer to as VBMs. These VBMs increase turnout by increasing the ease of voting, increasing V, like I was saying, thus extending voters' maximum tolerable ideological distance. In an election with VBMs everywhere, Biden could keep pivoting right without losing the left flank. However, with VBM removed in 2024, Harris's base had a lower V value, which would then, if you were using my formula, would decrease the maximum tolerable ideological distance. So V decreased, the D limit also decreased. And yet, she continued to increase her ideological distance from the left. By, parading around with Liz Cheney and promising to put Republicans in her cabinet and that kind of stuff, and not ending the war in Gaza. She really could have just gone after Biden for that. Just she did. She could have said something like, Biden and I always disagreed on how to tackle inflation, and then she could disown the inflation issue and then excite people. But instead she's like, I love Joe Biden. That was a mistake too. That's a separate point. In short, the Democratic strategy has always been compromise with the right to win the middle compromise with the right to win the middle, and the left will stay in line. This failed in 2016 when Bernie supporters flipped to Trump or stayed home. The near loss in 2020, being near, deluded Democrats into believing that they actually found a winning strategy, leading us to where we are in 2024. So what next? Well, for the Democratic Party, they're going to need to regain control of Congress in 2026. This can be done by increasing turnout with turnout improving policies, like mandatory voting, early voting, absentee voting, more forms of ID being accepted, automatic voter registration, more drop-off locations, more voting locations, etc., or invigorating the working class. Democrats already acknowledge the importance of turnout improving policies for their electoral success, but lack the ability to implement them federally until the next time they have a trifecta. Competent Democrats will implement those policies in every state that they possess the ability to. However, Democrats have to win in order to do that. And so, on the federal level, Democrats must still be invigorating. I really I saw Ben Wikler, chair of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin and candidate for chair of the National Democratic Party, made this point on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. Democrats for a long time have been trying to be the party of the working class through their messaging. However, most of their messaging is through outdated mediums like cable news outlets. Furthermore, the Americans who do hear the Democrat message just don't buy it because they just haven't felt it. The minimum wage hasn't increased in decades. And more jobs are disappearing overseas by the day. People don't feel the impact of the government in their lives. And when times are tough, people tend to vote against the incumbent unless they've sincerely felt that they've actually been helped by them in some way. That's why Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers when he ran for re-election, people who already felt the tangible improvements he made, they voted for him again because they actually felt like their lives had improved. And if Democrats want to ever win again, they need to make the American public feel that by passing good policies. Part of that is just having the political willpower to do it, but also the political willpower to really do it, right? I understand that Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema have been holding things up in the Senate for, when we held the trifecta for 2 years, they blocked literally everything. The Democratic Party needs to build a spine, right? If one senator is breaking the party line, the entire party should make their life hell until they do the good things. Otherwise, you look like you're a bitch when you say, oh, so sorry, I know literally everyone wants to raise the minimum wage, but the Senate parliamentarian who nobody's ever heard of said we can't do that. Remember that in 2021? That was who the fuck cares what the parliamentarian says? Go whoop his ass, Joe. Fucking crack the whip and get your members in line, Democrats. Or don't let them in the party. The Democratic Party has a real issue with letting too many people in, because the only requirement that it's ever taken to be a member of the Democratic Party is just dislike Trump, which is an extremely low bar. What does the party stand for? Right? That's why if you look at the numbers, Google this right now. How many Democrats switched to Republican while in office? And now look at how many Republicans switched to Democrat while in office. You're going to see, I think 17 to 30, somewhere between there. I'm so sorry that I don't know. Versus 0. Oh, and limit it to the last 4 years, of course. No Republicans are switching to Democrat, but Democrats are switching to Republican because they're not actually Democrats. They're literally just people who switch their registration to Democrat, run as Democrat, and then switch back. Yo, it's Eli from the future editing here. I just decided to Google it, and oh my god, look, I'm putting it on the screen right here. So we have 8 people. 8 people switched from Republican to Democrat, and how many people switched from Democrat to Republican? Let's do a little count. Oh, that's a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. 26 versus 8. We have a real loyalty problem in this party. That's all I'm saying. Bad actors are switching party just to get their names onto the ballot. We're seeing it fucking everywhere because Democrats don't care to excise Republicans from the party, and that's a fucking issue. So, while in office, Democrats need to get their party members in line. That's one thing. I should acknowledge that this point here is very different from the point that I made earlier. Earlier, I was saying that Democrats messed up by campaigning toward the right, whereas now I'm saying they need to pass good policies in order to win. And yeah, those are different points, but they're not mutually exclusive. Democrats, before the campaign, would do well to pass policies with tangible effects on constituent lives while in office. And then when they're running for re-election, they should campaign towards their base and not towards another one, not away from their base. Because you need to retain your base in order to win. We need the leadership of the Democratic National Committee to step aside, I think, so someone more in tune with the people and more capable of keeping their party in line can run the show. You'd think that this means we need an upset loss from Democrat establishment to make room for a challenger, but I don't think so, right? If you think all the leaders will step aside out of shame after presiding over a terrible loss, think again. In 2016, the Democrats lost the trifecta. And yet, Chuck Schumer still leads the Senate. And Nancy Pelosi, even though Hakeem Jeffries is the minority leader now, Nancy Pelosi still fucking runs the House. These people have all been in politics longer than my father's been alive. They have no fucking clue how the world works anymore. They have no idea what life is like for either of our generations who grew up with the internet. I was 4 years old when I got an iPad. I don't know if Nancy Pelosi's ever touched one besides, to trade insider stocks or, trade on inside information. These fucking boomers just keep telling us to shut the fuck up and walk the party line because the experts know what they're doing. That's what they kept telling me. I know because I've had them say that to my face when I worked for the party. I mean, not with those words, but the experts know what they're doing. I heard that so much. And I said, do they? Because that looks like a colossal mistake. There must be some reason for it. I'm sure they have a plan. No. Right now, we still have a chance to change course. The new DNC chair will be chosen on February 1st. At the current time, my favorite of the candidates for DNC chair is Ben Wikler, a Wisconsin Democratic Party chair. Other candidates for DNC chair just seem to be avoiding critical reflection over why 2024 went so poorly, whereas Wikler does not. When any of them are asked, do you think it was a mistake to pander so far to the right instead of to your own base? All of them just say, hey, whoa, let's not play the blame game here. Let's just look towards the future. But part of making the future good is figuring out why the past was bad. And just every interview that I see with these guys, they refuse to reflect. In fact, I mean, if you look at I mean, this isn't party chair candidates. This is former Harris campaign staff. They all say we actually ran a really good campaign, one of the best campaigns. In fact, we would have lost so much harder if we campaigned any differently. You should be thankful to us, honestly, for campaigning so well that we only lost by that much, because we would have lost by more if somebody else ran you. Fuck that. Fuck that. Oh my god, shut the fuck up, Jen O'Malley Dillon. I have a lot of anger towards Jen O'Malley Dillon, particularly, which I won't get into right now. So, I would trust Ben Wikler, right? His interview on The Daily Show was phenomenal, and it's made me feel really comfortable trusting him to run the party. But the DNC chair race is an election that most people don't pay attention to. And that's what the moneyed interests that currently run the party are counting on. Only DNC members can vote for the DNC chair, which makes this really tough for us who are not DNC members, just Democratic voters. Very different thing. And that makes it really tough. That's only a few hundred people that can vote for it. And that includes every elected Democrat in Congress and a handful of others. When a congressman gets a call about an issue, they're trained to see that one call as representative of thousands of voters, because most people hate calling in and would never bother to call their representative. So if one person is angry enough to do that, there's probably a whole lot more, right? It also demonstrates your organizing capacity to them. You already got this many people on board your cause. Think about it. If you get 5 to 10 people to call or leave a voice message, you might only have those 5 to 10 people, but they'll see it as a threat. You're actively convincing people to take political positions and take political action to confront their office. You are threatening to continue to organize a campaign against the candidate if they do not hear your demands. Make it a credible threat to their seat, and they'll listen to what you have to say. And don't give me that bullshit like, oh, it's like not gonna do anything, it's not even worth trying. It's a fucking phone call or a fucking email. It's free. Do you give a shit about the future? It's fucking free. Spend 15 minutes. Spend 15 more minutes getting your friend to do it. Let him copy paste what you send. Don't give me that it doesn't work shit, because fucking I know. There's like 80% chance they won't listen even if you get 1,000 people. But I'd still say there's a good 20% chance they would. In fact, the more people you get, the more likely they are to listen, because it'll be really hard for them to ignore you. This is my project. To the extent that I'm able to influence this, I will try to get Ben Wikler to be the chair of the DNC. Unless I find a better candidate. And I implore you to do the same. Because most people don't think about this election. That's why we're able to make so much ground. Think a city council race in a town of 1,000. 100 votes make a difference in a town of 1,000. This is a town of 500? Around there? We can make a fucking difference, but you have to fucking try. You can tell me how it doesn't work afterwards. How about? Thank you for listening to my thoughts on the 2024 election. If you think I've been insightful in my analysis, or at least amusing, subscribe to my YouTube channel, pretty please, and follow my Blue Sky account. I am building myself an independent platform on which I can air my frustrations with the liberal order and tell exclusive stories that literally nobody else knows about, because it's coming from my first-hand experiences directly within the field and my own brain. I will not be posting frequently, but when I have something worthwhile to say, I will. Next time I post is probably going to be a reflection on my time working for the Harris campaign and the AZ Dems, provided that I'm figure a good way to deliver that information without jeopardizing my future employment. Until then, take care. Thank you. Bye bye.